Hi everyone, I'm Bernard from Interreg, and together with my colleagues Mercedes, Robert, and Philip, we would very much like to welcome you to today's session on questions and answers to the rather mysterious policy objective 5. So, hope you will find some answers on that rather tricky policy objective in the following session. And now I would gladly like to introduce our two, let's say, key persons for the meeting from DG Regio. Now we have colleagues from Unit D2, Cross-Border Unit, it's Nathalie Veselde. And from Unit D1, we have Johan Magnusson as our key speakers. And I think, not to lose any time, I would like to give the floor to Nathalie for a couple of introductory remarks. Is that okay?
Yes. Thank you very much, Bernhard, and welcome to everyone in this, let's say, final piece in the puzzle that Interreg very kindly put together for all of us on bringing territoriality to Interreg. Thank you to the colleagues for having done that. I know it has been a challenge to find everybody, record everybody, and then organize the Q&A, so thank you for that. And then I also want to make sure that you all know that Johan, my colleague from D1, is also in the chat, sorry, not in the chat, in the Q&A today. And he can take questions related in particular to transnational programs and macro-regional strategies. So before we go to some of the questions that you have sent in advance, I wanted to make a couple of general remarks, and then might also then give the floor afterwards to Johan to answer this question on link to macro-regional strategies and transnational programs. So in terms of introduction, I just wanted to make a couple of comments like I did also when I made the presentation. First of all, we have received a number of questions in advance linked to the current COVID-19 crisis and the changes that this might bring to not only the current programming period, but of course also the future programming period. So in that context, I want to let you know again, I did already in the presentation that indeed the Commission will table in the middle of May a revised CPR regulation for 21-27. So I guess if we do that, it means that some changes are coming. That's the whole point. But I have to say that neither Johan nor myself are directly involved in this work. Not even our units, I should say. This is happening at a higher level between all the structural fund DGs. So I have no information to share with you on how far these changes might or might not affect Interreg programs. So, but I wanted to let you know that something is being cooked. We will see with you middle of May what the Commission proposes, but it's only going to be, of course, a proposal that will go into the pipeline of the negotiation and be considered by both the Parliament and the Council. So let's see. And I have no idea what the changes are at the moment. The second remark I wanted to make was that in the questions that some of you submitted, some of you expressed surprise about this new approach and how do we prepare, and we have no time to prepare. And on that, I'm a little bit surprised myself by those questions, because we tabled the draft regulation for ETC in 2018, 2 years ago, actually in May, 2 years ago. And since then, I think I certainly personally have spent hours trying to explain the new notions around the territory, the program area, the fact that adjacent areas are no longer necessary, the fact that there is no longer this eligibility linked to the location of the partners. We've spent 2 years explaining all that, including the functional approach. This is very highly present in the border orientation papers, which you will remember we shared already with you a year ago. So none of this is really new. I think we can't really say that we don't have the time to prepare. I also wanted to say it's a whole philosophy, and I can see in many questions that people are resisting basically the ideas and trying to tell us constantly that this would then require changes in the way the programs operate, and that there is little appetite for that. So here, because I will not go again answer all of these questions which are opposing, let's say, what we are what we have put on the table. This is, of course, also part of the negotiation still ongoing in Council. We have a philosophy that we want to put in front of you, and then let's see what happens in Council in terms of how what survives from that and how we make it work. Then thirdly, we are very aware that there is on the table in Council a proposal tabled by the Czech Republic, which has the support of, I think, 9 member states, something like that, which argues that for Interreg, the entire program should be considered as a strategy in the sense of PO5 strategies, and that all Interreg programs are by definition territorially integrated and functional areas. Now, again, this is now in Council. I have no real fresh information on how this this letter from the Czech Republic is being handled by the presidency. I don't really know what is happening. I have to say that although we have some sympathy for some of the arguments in the letter, we don't necessarily agree. That's the whole point, that some of the programs in Interreg are not, in our opinion, what we understand as a territory, integrated territory under PO5. So we have a little bit of a disagreement there. You know that, I try to explain as clearly as I could the concepts and PO5 in the presentation, and I hope that you will take from that we still do consider that inside certain program areas we have clearly identifiable functional areas where we would want to have indeed a different approach. We would want to move away from a project by project, fairly ad hoc approach to a much more integrated approach where a number of projects contribute in different sectors, contribute to the territorial development of an area. And in our reading, whilst indeed some programs could be considered as functional areas, in many cases it is not really the case. And I refer you back to the presentation by Jean Pironi, where he talked about the scales of integration. And we certainly would want to see that we go to the more local level. For instance, a twin city. We have a number of those along our borders, where you then really earmark some funds for that twin city to implement, because they often have already strategies, these twin towns. There's no need for them to reinvent the wheel. They can, of course, present their development strategies and then under PO5 use the tools that we have to implement in an integrated manner. This is a little bit, you understand, I mean, imagine we have Guben on the Polish-German border. They have to apply like anyone else to open calls all the time. They have no financial means to really implement their strategy because they don't know whether the project will be successful, not successful. It depends how many applications are submitted, the quality of the other applications. This is something that we would want to reduce this approach and then maybe move more in the direction of giving such territories which are clearly identifiable their own I mean, their own money to manage, their own funds to manage. So this is really quite important. So that was my introductory remarks, and I think that answers the first question. Bernard, please tell me if I'm wrong on can a program be used as the strategy mentioned under PO5. I think I tried to answer that question. And since we have the same questions applicable to the transnational and macro-regional strategy, sea basin strategies, I would want to maybe give the floor directly to Johan.
Yes, thank you very much, Natalie, and thanks to everyone. Good morning. And also thank you to Bernard, Philippe, and Mercedes for the organization of this seminar. And I know that you have been working a lot on this, and this is very much appreciated. Yes, what I wanted to say basically three things on this. The first thing is that we have, and as you know, I come from Unit D1. We are working specifically on the transnational programs in this context, and we have been working a lot on these issues now internally to try to develop on how we want to see PO5 in these types of programs. So a lot of work has really gone into that. And as Natalie said, this should not come as something new for you. You have known for a long time that we have PO5, and it shouldn't be really something new. What I also wanted to say is that we have been working a lot on this, but we still have some steps to go through here. And for the transnational programs, I know that Interreg is organizing a seminar on the 26th of May, specifically for those programs. And at that time, I will want to say that for that time we should have even a little bit more flesh on the bone on these issues. That's what I also wanted to say as a start. That was my second point. Then for the issue of the strategies, yes, I mean everything what Natalie said is of course valid as a baseline. What one could add for the transnational programs is that I think here it's very much a question of that the departure is very much the issue of functional areas. And I'd say that there also it varies a bit between the transnational programs. I think one can say that some of the transnational programs cover a functional area. Could it be a sea basin? Could it be a river basin? Others comprise of several functional areas, like for example the Central Europe programs and some others. So if we take the functional area and start a departure, I think you have already there a very, very like a good, let's say, concept to work with, to develop for what for like how the strategy should look like and what the strategy should be and what area it should cover. I would like to stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Johan. Now there's the question, programming has started. Many people started filling in the template, and the question arises for many people, what should be actually in the program document? What's, let's say, the required content? Because we understood from your presentation, Natalie, that the strategy not necessarily has to be ready when handing in the program, when submitting the program, but might be finalized later on, even using funds from better governance objective to build capacities, to build the strategy. But what should be in the program document? Question to you, Natalie.
Okay, thank you, Bernard. So in the program document under PO5, those who program PO5, I can envisage a different scenario. Let's say you have a program area where you clearly identify certain functional areas, and of course, the programming task force and the people responsible for the program, because we always, of course, come back to those who make the decisions. They agree that there should be an integrated tool to support the development of, let's say, I take examples, two twin cities, or that there is a rural area which shows very clearly that it has the same features on both sides, the same landscapes, the same type of economy, villages. And I refer you back also to the presentation by the Austria Italy program on their CLLD. So you have identified these areas, and you then write in your program document that these are the territories that you would want to support using PO5, and you try to describe these territories. We would, of course, very much like to see the strategies of these territories already in place, but it is not a requirement. If you talk about twin cities, very, very often these have already existing joint development plans that they can easily use as strategies. So in your program, you should definitely identify the areas and describe them. We have gone as far as saying that if you don't, if you haven't identified them, it's still okay to then describe that you will use PO5 and that the identification of the territories and the strategies will come at a later stage. It's a little bit complicated then, of course, to assess whether this is right or not, and to assess also the budget that will have been assigned to PO5. Therefore, we would really want to see as much information as possible. We should then also ideally have a description of the mechanism that will be used to implement PO5. So let's say that you have identified 3 territories for which you want to put in place an integrated development strategy and use the tools. Then we would want you to describe who is then going to be the authority that will manage the integrated territorial plan, and who is going to be involved, and how projects are going to be selected. But again, ideally, this is what we would want to see upfront, but it could also be done at a later stage. So it's fairly open on that. I think we would, if you decide to use PO5 for integrated territorial development of local areas, we would want to see a narrative on that, which is quite robust and based, of course, on evidence that you have collected. Then I would say we could envisage something slightly different in the case of tourism, sustainable tourism and culture. I also made it clear in my presentation that for tourism, you could consider also the whole program area as an integrated area if you have, let's say, a clearly identified destination, for instance, for tourism. And there we would want to see a specific tourism strategy that addresses all the aspects of tourism. Tourism is not just about rebuilding a castle somewhere or putting some IT-based info points here and there. This is not integrated tourism development. This is just, again, ad hoc projects, all of which might contribute to some tourism development, but this is not strategic and it's not integrated. So if in the case of tourism, we would want to see a specific strategy, what is the destination, what are its strengths, why should it be developed, and then by whom and how. And this is really what we would want to see in the program document. And as I said also, I saw that, sorry, I anticipate some of the questions, but some people say, well, tourism is not multi-sectoral. Well, I tend to disagree with that. If you are seriously considering developing your program area or part of your program area, because it's not always the whole program area. I took the example of Spain, Portugal. Anybody who has been in that area can see clearly that between the south of Portugal, Spain, Andalusia, and Algarve, and the very north in Galicia, Norte, these are two very different territories and areas. Also from a touristic point of view, they don't have the same selling points. They don't have the same assets. So they need their own strategies. And it's not just rebuilding something, it's access to the area, it's of course information and marketing, it's having the right people to sell the products, in hotels, in restaurants, in museums. It's really skill development is very important. Somebody also mentioned healthcare. If you suddenly have a very large influx of tourists in the summer or in the winter or throughout the year, you need to also make sure that you have the capacity to handle a number of issues. So that's what we mean by tourism as as being multi-sectoral, not just reconstructing old buildings as we have seen a lot in programs. So we would want to see as much information as possible in the programs, and I would say that you have to really, of course, be coherent with what it is that you are proposing to do for PO5, integrated territorial development of local areas, or maybe a bigger tourism strategy or a smaller tourism strategy. You have to simply write what it is that you want to do territorially with PO5.
I think Nathalie said very many good things there, which also apply to the transnational programs. If we start with tourism, of course, absolutely. Tourism is not a sector. It consists of, in itself, it consists of very, very many aspects: skills, environment, climate change, waste, you name it. It's all there, and all these issues are relevant. So all that needs to be taken into account. That's one thing, and that I think that goes for all types of programs. And also, obviously, if it is so that we have, and I talk about functional area, we have a functional area that consists of, for example, small islands in a transnational setting. Yeah, perhaps there we have then an area where one could work on tourism, but it has to be from this kind of, let's say, multi-sectoral kind of approach. Not only restoring buildings or restoring hotels or something. That we don't want to see some standalone investments. We want to see something that covers all the various aspects of tourism, or for example culture, which is a bit the same. Then finally, going back again to what should be in the programs in terms of strategy, and again about, I think normally you would already have an idea of what kind of areas you have in your programs that you want to cover. There are, there are certain, it's no, I would say it's no rocket science. You know already which functional areas you have. There can be several, very often it is, sometimes it's perhaps not. So this shouldn't be so very difficult. And of course, we want to see, even if you have not selected these strategies, we would like to see as much information as possible which is available. And I think there are still a lot of things that could be said and added in the programs.
Thanks for these answers. I've learned once spatial planning at the university, and there is this unfortunate split into two specific objectives, which is, of course, let's say from point of spatial planning, a disaster to split something into urban territories and other territories. But my key point is that in most cases in Interreg programs, let's say territories are neither purely urban nor purely rural. So very pragmatic, very simple questions. What should programs do in terms of selecting specific objective?
Well, as you said, Bernard, of course, the whole point of what we're discussing is to consider territories in a holistic manner. And indeed, it's quite unfortunate that we constantly have to have this split between urban and non-urban, and then we end up talking about peri-urban, and then we talk about semi-rural. Clearly this distinction is not natural in inverted commas. The two SOs say exactly the same thing. The only difference is indeed between urban and not urban. So I would say if you are a very urban program and your PO5 will be dedicated to integrated development strategies for, let's say, 2 or 3 urban centers. Okay, choose the SO1 on urban, by all means. If you have a mix, then choose the other one, clearly, because it's the same thing. It's just it's a little bit semantics. And for us, one of the things we use this separation for is to be able to say how much money is being spent in the end on urban territories, because we are DG regional and urban policy, as you know. So I wouldn't really make that a difficult point. And I would say, if you have a mixture of territory, choose SO2 without hesitation. I think, Johan, that's not necessarily so relevant for you, because all your transnationals are mixed, right?
Yes,
Or very rural.
I would agree there. I think I would suggest that you should put it on the second specific objective for the transnational programs. Otherwise, it would be unless you are absolutely sure that you have something which is very urban. But I think for transnational programs, that's even less an issue than that it is for CBCs.
For me, that was pretty clear. And that brings
Good.
me to the last opening question as kind of a warm-up. I understood from your presentation that, let's say, the major intent is that when projects that, let's say, the strategy owner should have a say on the projects, and that in the selection mechanism, multi-level governance and or specific sectoral expertise which is required in terms of the integrated strategy should be considered. This is what I understood from your presentation. And now maybe you could give us a couple of examples how you could envisage the selection mechanism if a program decides to go for policy objective 5.
Okay, well, this is a wide question, of course, because we have a variety of mechanisms that could apply. Of course, we have some in the tools which include selection, ITIs or CLLDs. This is already slightly defined in the regulation, but we have also these other tools where I think most CBC programs will probably turn to, because it offers them a lot of flexibility. To answer the question, we need to go back to the whole philosophy. The whole point of PO5 is to bring the program closer to a certain territory, which is coherent, which we can develop in an integrated manner, and therefore also the selection of projects or the selection of actions that need to happen for this territory to develop in an integrated manner should be made closer to the territory. So that's the whole point. Let's take again the concept of a twin city on a border. If you decide that there indeed we have a territorial, an integrated territory, we have the strategy, the two cities have had a strategy for many years, they have perspectives 2030, something like that. We allocate funds to this particular strategy, to implement this strategy. Then the selection of what should happen should also be in the hands of the actors of that twin town territory. And therefore, if there is an EGTC, for instance, we would see it as extremely positive if the EGTC then became responsible for the implementation of the strategy, and the EGTC had organized a group of stakeholders to select the actions. I also want to remind you that it's also possible to have the actions already pre-identified and defined in the strategy. That's actually even better, I would say, if they know we need to invest in public transport, we need to invest in our joint hospital, we need to invest in developing employment services together. If that's already predefined, that's even better. But if it's not, then it's for the owners of the strategy to set up a group of stakeholders who will be responsible for selecting the projects. The monitoring committee of the program, of course, can still remain involved in this by, for instance, approving the strategy and then rubber stamping the selection of projects. That's not a big deal. The thing is also that then after, the contracting remains with the managing authority. And this is where I think some people also ask the question that what about this trust issue that I mentioned in my presentation? Well, there must be some level of trust between those who will then manage the territory by implementing their strategy, selecting their projects, and then the managing authority, which will in the end assign individual contracts. Okay, so that's when we come back to tourism, for instance, there I see that things could be slightly different. Let's take the example of the Tatras, for instance, the High Tatras. Okay, let's agree that in the program Slovakia, Poland, PO5 is used notably to promote and develop the High Tatras as a sustainable tourism destination. It makes sense. It's a clearly identified destination. It has much to offer. The investments are needed in different parts of the territory, but also in different sectors. Johan made a very, very clear plea for this tourism to be multi-sector in a way. There you could envisage that the program structures are used to implement PO5, because the program is actually coincides largely with the area, the destination that you want to develop and promote. But I would still argue that the selection of projects that contribute to this tourism strategy should be made by a specific selection committee under the monitoring committee, and should bring the actors of tourism. And it should not really be everybody in the region dealing with innovation or whatever. No, it should be really a steering committee of people who are in charge of developing tourism and know exactly what is needed for tourism to develop in that area. So in that case, the program structures can be largely used to implement PO5, except, in my opinion, for the selection of operations that should really, really take place with the specific group of stakeholders in that sector. I don't know if Johan wants to compliment.
Yeah, not so very much for me to add on that. I think the key issue, the key kind of message here is that for the selection, we want that it is the people who are, let's say, specifically, let's say, touched by this this PO5 that should be involved in it. That is kind of the key principle here. And then, I mean, obviously, if it is tourism, then we talk about people who work with tourism. If we talk about development of strategies of functional areas, be them larger or smaller, it is, let's say, that grouping. I think that's the key principle, simply.
So thanks a lot to Natalie. Thanks a lot, Johan. Yes, so I think first one is pretty clear. Small project fund would be very interesting model to be run under policy objective 5. Are there any specific requirements if you want to do so?
Well, I guess this is more for me. I mean, Johan, you come in whenever you wish. But small project funds have been a very popular topic with cross-border programs for a long, long time now, for decades even. Well, of course, you can imagine to use a small project fund as a tool to implement a particular territorial development strategy under PO5. But you have to then use the rules that regulate the functioning of a small project fund. I think it's not incompatible. It actually can work rather well.
Mhm.
But then, of course, in which big independent projects are implemented, then you can't use a small project fund. I mean, it's pretty. I don't really understand the sense of the question. If you have a tourism strategy in which you know already that significant investments will be needed, for instance, in certain types of infrastructure, clearly a small project fund is not the tool that you would want to use to implement that tourism strategy. If, on the other hand, you implement PO5 in the context of a local integrated development strategy, again, between two cities, for instance, where it's going to be more about soft measures in employment, in health, in education, in public transport, the small project fund then should be seriously considered as a way of doing this. That's compatible, I would say. So that would be my answer to that question. Then, sorry, somebody asked if ITI, CLLD are mandatory. I think you need to read the regulation, please. It's ITI, CLLD, or another tool. So of course they are not mandatory. They are an option, like the other tool. You can also devise your own tool. You don't have to use ITI and CLLD.
Johan, would you like?
Can I? Yeah, just to comment on the last one there. No, obviously, ITI and CLLD are not mandatory, and I think that in the context of transnational programs, possibly even more than in the context of cross-border, ITI and CLLD are, let's say, a little bit of a unknown territory. I would personally very much like to see these concepts being developed in the transnational context, but I think at the same time we have to be realistic and try to go for let's say tools that we can make something out of. And if it is so that the key concern here is that this is something new and that this is something that is a bit difficult to work with, I think rather that it's pretty obvious that what you should look at is this kind of other types of tools as we are talking about and we are trying to develop. I mean, CLLD, for example, and I know because I have been working with it for years, it's a very interesting tool, but it's also something which is quite demanding. And we have one example from cross-border areas and how this has been taken forward. I mean, let's also be realistic in this and try to perhaps not jump on the most, let's say, ambitious things from the start. Or on the other hand, I don't want to discourage anyone from using it if there is a clear interest of using it. But I just want to make this.
So, and then comes a nice one. It's about conflict of interest in project selection. I mean, coming from Austria as a very federal country, I think I know very well what people have in mind, but my first reaction would be it's the same as for all other projects, but maybe Natalie, you might want to say something on that, or Johan.
Well, I mean, of course, conflict of interest is an issue everywhere. The moment we talk about managing funds, conflict of interest as a question, of course, arises, and we need to tackle it. I think in the context of having very local integrated strategies, we want the owners of the strategies to also be the ones to decide what is needed on that territory to move ahead. So I think the conflict of interest here is very much connected to individuals and their involvement, possibly with certain companies, for instance, certain businesses, I think it's less of an institutional nature, because by definition, what you do if you say that Comarno, Comarom, together the two municipalities receive 5 million euro for their integrated development strategy, clearly those around the table selecting the different operations will be close to the beneficiaries, the final beneficiaries, because territorially even they are in the same area. But it would be for people to declare a conflict of interest on a personal basis if one arises. But in a way, you know, it's not bad if those who are involved in a territory are then also those who decide what is needed for that territory. We have to just be very careful that there is no conflict of interest for a person, and that they can then use some of the funds for their own, to pursue their own private interest. I would see it like that. Johan, you want to complement, or is that would apply to everyone, right?
Okay, so then I propose we move to the next one. It's switching constantly, but let's start with the integration of tourism in the other policy objectives. You've mentioned that during your presentation, and I think there is a couple of leads how to do so in your presentation, Nathalie. But maybe once more briefly, because yeah, I think it's one of the key issues that culture and tourism is part of policy objective 5, and of course very interesting for cross-border programs as well as for transnational programs.
Well, I mean, what we clearly say on that is that if your objective is to develop the destination as a tourism product, and if you want to attract visitors to a specific destination, activity based or territorially based or history based or whatever it is, we think it's much better to go to PO5, where you can implement indeed a number of different types of actions in the environmental field, in the employment field, in skills development, in transport. That would make sense in PO5. The moment you want to support tourism through the other POs, the main objective has to be the objective of that PO and not the tourism objective, if you see the difference. If you put tourism under PO4, you would have to look at soft actions in employment and skills, for instance, for tourism. But the key objective would have to fit under PO4 and not necessarily under PO5. I hope you see the difference. Under PO4, you could not do an integrated tourism development strategy. You could not. You could only do the bits of the strategy which fit under inclusive, you know, the inclusion and employment and healthcare and social integration and these things. That's the difference between the two. Of course, you can do both. I mean, nothing prevents you from saying that you have a destination inside your border area or your transnational area. You have a destination which is clearly identified. You go for an integrated approach to that destination using PO5. And you can also say that under PO4, for instance, you have a skills development strategy for your area under which tourism is one of the sectors for which you want to develop specific skills. I mean, these two things are not mutually exclusive. Of course, you could do both. If you do tourism under PO1, it has to be about innovation, using innovation in tourism or developing innovation through tourism. So that's the difference between the two sides. The two can be combined if you wish, or you can do one or the other.
Yeah, there is not so much to add to that. I think that was a very clear reply to the question. I think one could possibly say that to use PO5 is in a way perhaps a more elegant solution, because like that you can really address many aspects at the same time. But as also, as Nathalie says, I mean, you can also use the other POs, but then the focus is a little bit different. Of course, they are not you can combine these things, and perhaps that is what you should do if you want to have, I mean, a full coverage. But that's up to you to decide how you want to do.
Yeah.
And
Sorry, can I take the first question? EC document PO5 coming. You know very well, I think the Commission has been very clear that there would be no written guidance for the next programming period, because in the end of the day, we spend all our time interpreting the guidance, interpreting the interpretation of the guidance, and we certainly have received clear instructions from our hierarchy not to issue written guidance. So I don't think a document will be coming unless the hierarchy at some point changes its approach. But for now, neither Johan nor I can share with you a document explaining PO5.
No, that's exactly it. It's written guidance is something that we are not issuing. But as I said initially, I hope to be able to say a little bit more, perhaps, on PO5 at the other Interact seminar on the 26th. But written guidance is something that we are not issuing.
We also think, by the way, that we've invested with Interact so much in this particular event and topic that, frankly speaking, there is not much more that could be added in a written document. I think you have presentations, you have recordings of presentations and of Q&As, and for the moment, that will stop at that. But we are happy to answer questions, always.
okay, now we have a next. I would say there is one on if you would like to use funds from PO5 for recovery of tourism industry from the current COVID-19 crisis, so projection into the future. I understand it like that. If then, in that case, no strategy as such would be required, what would you say to that?
Using the future programs.
Exactly, of course, yeah.
Well, again, it depends what you want to do in terms of supporting the recovery. If it's about restarting your tourism destination as a destination, you might want to do it under PO5 with a strategy. If it's about giving funds to SMEs, for instance, in the tourism field to give them a kickstart to continue their businesses, which already exist, which is already part of the existing strategy. You don't need a strategy, but you should not use PO5 either. You should use the SME tool for that. So it really depends on what measures you want to take. I think it's the same logic that applies, COVID or no COVID, to what you want to do, to the approach you want to take.
Okay, and then I think the question on if a program doesn't go for PO5 because of, let's say, strict requirements to build a strategy, capacities along the strategy to use another policy objective or Interreg specific objective, I think that has been answered. And
yes, I would want to add, sorry, Bernard, I would want to add that the Interreg specific objective, I guess the person means the better cooperation governance. I want to clarify again that this specific Interreg specific objective is not meant for any types of investments, and this is a soft objective looking at institutional cooperation, trust, capacity building, but not investments. And so I would certainly not see tourism activities under this specific objective unless it was about, starting all this process of having in the medium term a tourism strategy, for instance, and bringing the actors of the sectors that are involved in tourism together to start the whole process institutionally. that could very well be done under the Interreg specific objective. But if it's about implementing tourism projects, I don't see it fitting at all under that specific objective.
So you might use better cooperation governance to build the institution and the capacities in order to run the strategies under PO5.
Yes.
Then there is a nice one coming through the back door, the question, managing authority, if it could be considered or if it could manage a small project fund. As far as I know, it's simply still in negotiations, but maybe you could quickly say
in the current state of the legislation, no, a managing authority doesn't run a small project fund. A small project fund, by definition, is given to manage to another institution. So I would not see a managing authority managing a small project fund. That doesn't make any sense. That's not the point, at least not in the way the article is written now.
And just a remark on that, we've had a seminar in Bratislava early this year, and there are a couple of presentations where I think other models for small project facilities have been presented. Just
yeah, no, for sure.
Interested. It's
exactly.
Then not the small project fund according
Voilà.
Article 23.
Yes, so please don't misinterpret my answer. A small project fund in the sense of the article dedicated to small project fund is not something that should be managed by a managing authority. That does not mean that the managing authority cannot run itself some sort of small project operation like we have already. Of course, I think about France-Belgium program where they run a micro project fund themselves, the managing authority. That's of course allowed. Under PO5, I think it's not really the objective to do that under PO5.
Then next one, strategy. Who should approve it? Should the program be involved in approval of strategy? I understood it's strategy in the sense of multi-level governance, which should be approved, of course, by the proper strategy owners, but we've received a lot of questions on that in one or the other way. So please help.
Johan, I take it from the CBC point of view, okay? For us, I mean, PO5 is part of the program. It's not a standalone, separate things from the program. So if PO5 is in the program document, it means that there is an agreement from all the partners of the program to do it like that. And indeed, if there are 1, 2, or 3 strategies to develop local areas or a tourism strategy, for me, it should go through the program decision-making structure, i.e., I would say the monitoring committee should at least see those strategies and rubber stamp them. But they have to remain the ownership of the PO5 specific strategy put in place. But I would say it would make sense if the document, the strategy behind a PO5 integrated development action would be rubber stamped by the monitoring committee.
Yeah, if I can say, I think basically that would make sense also for the transnational programs. Obviously, I mean, in a way, the most important thing is that these integrated strategies are developed by the concerned stakeholders, that they agree on the document. And they will then be transnational and they will sit in different countries. And I think that's the key thing here, that we don't want to see strategies which are not really, which just come from one side, for example, one country or whatever. But I also think that it would make sense that the monitoring committee is aware of what's going on, and I think it could probably be a good practice that they also have seen it, they rubber stamp it.
Okay, then there is next one, which again deals with the link between the specific Interreg specific objective better governance, and since it could be used to build capacities for strategies, and the link to policy objective 5. And the question is formulated as such that if it would be a solution to implement PO5 principles under the Interreg specific objective better cooperation governance. More practically speaking, there is currently simply the discussion if policy objective 5 is too complicated, we go for Interreg specific objective better cooperation governance. To put it bluntly, what would you say to that?
Well, if we have different types of objectives, it's because we have different types of philosophies behind. I mean, if you could simply exchange PO5 for ISO 1, or that would make no sense. These things are built and designed to deliver different types of actions. To some extent, the overlap you could identify between the governance specific objective and PO5 is indeed in the need for capacity building of certain key actors and stakeholders, for indeed preparing strategies. That's absolutely possible. But you should not use the specific objective governance to implement PO5 type of actions. That doesn't make any sense. It can come in support of let's say, building the PO5 delivery mechanism, but it should not replace it in any way, if that's the question. Also, what you could do under the governance specific objective is to develop strategies for the future, for the longer term future, and also strategies which would not necessarily be delivered by Interreg. There are other funding mechanisms, of course, also using public finance, local, regional, national. You could then have strategies to do that, or you could have strategy. You could use the governance to prepare. To promote tools like the EGTC or like Euro districts, Euro regions, to become much more competent to then later on play a key role in the implementation of PO5. That could be done, but you cannot replace one by the other. These are different things. Even more so, I would say, under transnational, Johan, right?
Yeah, no, I would say just taking one way of using PO5 in transnational programs, which could be to let's say help a bit the connection between functional areas to establish these links and to foster cooperation between them. But I mean, if you do that under the specific Interreg objective, you lose, I mean, a bit the kind of the whole idea with PO5, namely this specific focus on involving those people that are actually concerned. I think then we lose also a bit the very essence of why we have PO5. So I wouldn't use the specific objective for that type of issues, given the fact that we lose a bit, if you like, the possibilities that you have when you, I mean, I wouldn't see PO5 as something which is very burdensome and complicated. I would rather see it as an opportunity to bring into the process those who are, let's say, concerned about this issue, and that's an added value for me.
Okay, now the next one for me, coming from a landlocked country, leaving the territories I know well, it's about, I understand it like what could be other tools from maritime perspective. And I read the abbreviation as, I think it's about integrated maritime planning. And
It's
there's
integrated
also coastal zone management.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Integrated coastal zone management. Exactly. I have been working in DG Maris, so I know that abbreviation.
Would you take that, please, Johan?
Yeah, I can start with that one. All right, so are there specific recommended tools for maritime cooperation on specific issues like integrated coastal zone management, and what about maritime ITIs? Yeah, well, again, I think that from the transnational context, to work in a maritime setting, so for example in a sea basin, that's one of those functional areas that we are talking about. That's what you could do. Specifically working on CZM, yes, I mean, why not? I think this is something that, and certainly our colleagues in the Yamara would be very happy to see this, and to see this developed. There's another aspect to this, and that's maritime special planning that you touched upon last week, where there's a directive that member states have to, member states have to, they are obliged to set up this maritime special planning. All member states have to do that, and there's a timeline for that. So if that is something that you want to concentrate on, why not? And the same about the maritime ITI. Again, now we are into these off-the-shelf tools, CLLD and ITI, as we talked about before. I would say that talking about the transnational programs, it is perhaps not the pre-made off-the-shelf tools that perhaps are the first one to go for, unless you have a very, very good background in this and specific interests in this. But why not?
Yes, and sorry to confirm indeed, for us too, we have a cross-border cooperation in maritime context. Yes, of course, you could do integrated coastal zone management under PO5. Absolutely, yes. I mean, it depends on your very, of course, specific program area, but yes, why not? And a maritime ITI, why not? And or having inside the program area, a specific zone, maritime zone. For instance, we have this national park between Corsica and Sardinia, which is a national park at sea. This is something where you could actually also say we do a PO5 strategy for the development of that maritime park area, protected area, and we bring in there different aspects of environmental, of course, management, but also blue economy, possibly sustainable tourism and that kind of stuff. Absolutely, absolutely. So the answer is yes.
And okay, now you gave me ideas here, Natalie. I'm thinking again about maritime special planning and how one could perhaps take that forward into this transnational context, because obviously there it is so that there are some areas and some countries which are perhaps a little bit more advanced on this than others. And if you would work with this, let's say within the sea basin context, with a number of countries, I think this could be a nice topic to use, where you could, share experience and share ideas about how you could develop this MSP context in a bit similar settings. It can be that one country has, they have a bit the same. The settings are a bit the same, but one country has come further. So for me, this is really could be something. Huh?
Thanks. Next question's quite technical. So in your presentation, Natalie, you've mentioned that the strategy can be finalized after program adoption if required with Interreg funding brackets from better cooperation governance. It seems there is a question what the term finalized could mean, whether it's approval by the strategy owner, whatever standing conference of mayors, or what is meant by finalizing the strategy.
Well, yes, what I meant was that, of course, the programs, none of the programs operate in a vacuum. So I don't think that for any program, we would start from scratch with these strategies under PO5. But what I meant here was that maybe the strategy or the ideas of a strategy are there, but that it's not yet prepared following the requirements of the regulation, or that it's not yet indeed approved by all the owners and stakeholders in a consultation process. Or I would say also finalized, I would also say that it has been then shared with the monitoring committee and rubber stamped by the monitoring committee. It's that process that I meant can be done after program adoption. But really, to be honest, I mean, if people in the meeting today go back and say, well, we have no idea of what PO5 is and where to start, then we are probably in trouble, because you all operate with territories already now, and fundamentally you should simply you should know whether you have these types of areas, or whether you can do culture and tourism in a very integrated manner in your program area. And the idea is to put in place the blocks that we need in terms of the regulation, a strategy which is finalized, which is agreed, approved, which is owned by somebody, which the monitoring committee can live with, and the managing authority help implement. That's what we meant by finalize. I meant by finalize.
Johan, would you like to say something on that, or?
No.
Okay. Then next question, also a bit technical. In case it is shown that the strategy was, let's say, properly built, including multi-level governance, public consultations, could you think of this, let's say, could you think of project selection without a specific committee or involvement of specific expertise?
Well, I would say this does not go in the direction of what we want to see under PO5 and everything that we've been discussing for more than an hour. This would not really be how we would like to see it. Now, I also said several times that although we all operate under the same rules, obviously we have a regulation, we also know that every cross-border program is different from the other ones. So this is something that we might want to look at very specifically for a program. If you have a very small territory, we might have to consider how the MA can play a role in implementing PO5 directly. But having said that, I would strongly doubt that you can do it without at least a separate steering committee with the owners of the territorial strategy, whether tourism or not tourism.
Yeah, and if I can come in there, I mean, this also goes back a bit to the discussions we had now in the beginning of this seminar, when we looked about the strategies and what could be a strategy, and also this issue that some of you have raised, whether a program itself could be a strategy or not, and where I said that we are still looking into this, and I will perhaps be able to say a little bit more about that at the seminar in May. But that being said, because it also depends, I mean, very much on the level of and the scale of these programs. And what we do not want to have is a situation where, I mean, we use, let's say, the classical mechanisms of the program in a case where the scale, let's say, is doesn't fit with what we want to do. The important thing here is that we have, and that's again, as I have said repeatedly, that's a bit the beauty of PO5, that we have the people and the scales that are really involved and related to this, because this is about citizens' involvement. Yeah, that's as much as I would like to say at the moment.
Okay, then there is a question exactly related where to find information on that event. Yes, we will publish it soon on the Interact website. It's simply work in progress. Then there comes again a question to you, Johan, on transnational programs. sometimes transnational programs, let's say, they cover vast and very different types of territories. And question is if all these territories should be tackled under PO5. I would rather see the discretion of the program partners to decide on that, but please.
Yes. No, obviously, that is very much for program partners to decide on. But the point here is, so how should the territories look like? Yes, so in the transnational programs, we talk about scale, which I think is a little bit different than in the cross-border programs. We could, for example, have a set of islands. And these islands may be geographically located in different, let's say, parts of this area that the program covers. But then we have a specific, let's say, a type of territory, say islands, and we can cover them. We can have mountain ranges. We can have several, for example. That we could imagine that we have a transnational program with several such mountain areas. Then we can we could add them as a functional territory, or we could have urban rural areas, for example, a number of them that we want to cover. Then we do that, but this is very much for the partnership to decide what these areas should look like and how they should look like. What is specific here for the transnational programs is then that these areas may not physically be geographically attached. They may be scattered around the area of the program. That is a bit, say, the character of the transnational programs. But what you would have is a set of, it's coherent in the way that you have a set of islands that are covered, you have a set of mountains areas, or a set of urban rural areas, or a set of metropolitan areas, or whatever.
The sea as such be the territory, and the strategy be the specific maritime dimension with the Maritime Steering Committee governing the strategy. What would you say to that, Johan?
That's an interesting idea. I haven't really been, yeah, sorry, excuse me.
So looking at a sea basin as a functional area, this is, I think, what could be the underlying rationale behind the question, that sea basin as such is a functional area.
Yes, yes, but that I certainly think that it could be a sea basin, and that's what I also said initially. A sea basin could be a functional area, as could be a river basin, as could also be parts of the sea basin or parts of the river area. I mean, here it depends. It depends very much on how we define the functional area. The sea basin could certainly be a functional area, in my opinion, and also a river basin.
Natalie, would you like to say something on that? Or?
No, I indeed for cross-border cooperation in the maritime context is the same. The sea is what actually binds these territories together. So indeed, you could definitely look at that and how that can become the focus of an integrated territorial strategy. Indeed.
Thanks. The next one, I have to smile a bit because for me it's very much also the element of trust lingering behind these questions. Is it possible to delegate any monitoring committee member into strategy management (steering committee)? So I think there is still a misunderstanding of a very confrontational approach where the MC has to control a mysterious strategy managing body, eventually selecting projects, and I think that's not the point.
Exactly. Thank you, Bernard. Indeed, it's not the point, and it should not be. That should not be the question. Anybody who is involved in implementing an integrated territorial strategy in the sense of PO5 has to be directly connected to that territory. So has to come from there or have a very high stake in that territory. And there is no point in delegating someone from the MC to that body. That makes no sense unless somebody from the territory is also a member of the monitoring committee. That's absolutely, of course, possible. But the two things are not necessarily connected. And if the idea is to send someone in there to make sure they do the right thing and and spy on that body that selects its own operations for its local territory, then no, of course that's not the point. That's not the idea. Now you could very well say that the mayor of a town involved in a local integrated territorial strategy is also a member of the monitoring committee. That can definitely, of course, happen. That's not absolutely forbidden. It's a different question from the one that has been formulated here, I guess.
There is now one on top. Can be any members of the MC also be members of the strategy?
Yes, if they belong to that area and if they have a stake in that particular strategy, it's not forbidden. Of course, nothing prevents that from happening. It simply has to make sense and be true.
Yeah, if I can come in here also, and I do it now with experience I have from having been working with CLLD and leader programs for many years. I mean, they have, I know that CLLD is perhaps a little what we are talking about for most of our programs here, but there's still some, let's say, experience that I think we can draw from that exercise. And for leader programs, and leader how it is implemented today, it's done through the rural development programs, which are basically functioning in the same, I mean, to a broad extent, I'd say, as an ERDF program. But then you have a little part of it, let's say, which is this leader, and where you have, which is then devoted, given, if you like, to a number of local action groups, which are, if you like, this a bit like a steering committee that decides, that selects these projects, and how, and but they normally, very often, they don't do the contracting. And how does that work then in terms of I mean, in the relations with the monitoring committee for such programs, which obviously have, I mean, which are responsible for the whole program? I think again, it's very much a question of, you know, developing this kind of mutual trust between these different levels. Obviously, to a certain extent, there can be cases where there are people who sit on in the local action group, are also part of the monitoring committee. But it's, I mean, that's not a standard rule. So the thing is that, but this works. I mean, this we have been working with for decades. So I think that there is, for those who you know, feel very uncomfortable, if you like, with this sort of arrangement, I think there can be quite a lot to listen from the experience of colleagues working with those rural development programs that have within them this leader component.
Thank you, Johan. Just a reminder, there is a video from. Sorry. Yeah.
Sorry. No, I just, can I just add one remark to what Johan said, which is extremely right and useful to hear. And I think this is one of the key misunderstandings here. When I read all these questions, you seem, all of you, to still envisage this PO5 working method as if it was a replica of the program working method, and it's not. It's not. I think you all think that under these local integrated development strategies, people will necessarily, for sure, launch calls and select projects. It's not necessarily like that. It's a different method. And also, this is why this conflict of interest, this representation of the MC, it means that you haven't yet accepted that what we are saying is if you do, and in CNLD, it's very, very, very central. You don't launch a call necessarily. You collectively decide what needs to be done. And then you allocate funds to different organizations to do it. It's not that you would call for, you don't replicate a program in miniature. This is absolutely not the way to work. It's a different method. And please, you really have to understand that. If you have a twin city with its own strategy, the partners sitting around the table owning that strategy and implementing PO5 can decide what the projects should be. That's why we say that in that strategy, it's very good if they can have a list of projects to implement. I think in your minds, from the questions I read, you want to do under PO5 a mini program. This is not necessarily the case at all. And really, this is where you need to really open your minds to the fact that you could have 2 mayors plus a local employment office, plus a local tourism office, plus the school board or whatever, to sitting together and deciding that what they want is to invest here and here and there, and not through a competitive call for projects, which then of course brings up all sorts of other questions in your mind if that's how you envisage it. But it's not the one way to do this in PO5.
Okay, I think now we go for the final 2 questions. One question we also got repeatedly is about, we have elaborated a strategy in the program. There is one. Can that be used? Or do we have to elaborate new ones? And I understood clearly that as a requirement, it has to be a cross-border or a transnational strategy, of course. And secondly, I understood that, of course, to put it again bluntly, the strategy owner has still to be alive. So there must be someone standing behind it. It should not be just a document elaborated by consultants, but still something which is the result of a decision making, and people standing behind it are still there. But please, Natalie, could you?
Yes, of course. Of course, if you have an existing strategy, you can use it. Of course, and no one wants to. No one is asking that we start all over again. It has to be. I mean, provided, of course, it fits into what you want to do with PO5. So let's say that within your program area, you have a very clearly identifiable tourism destination, a mountain range, for instance. Let's take the Beskidi Mountains, and they have a strategy, and you want to use PO5, then they need to simply, I would say, revisit the strategy in terms of updating it, and then deciding who then will be implementing the strategy, which group of people will then be this kind of selection and monitoring body that will follow the strategy. They don't need to start writing a strategy from scratch. It simply has to fit into, well, it has to be updated, obviously, it has to be cross-border, and fit into the PO5 requirements, but yes, you can use something that's already on the table and improve it.
Johan, would you like to say something to that, or?
No, I think that I agree very much with what Natalie said in terms of the fact that if you have a strategy that is already there, you should obviously use it. It can be that you a little bit have to screw on it on one or the other aspect, but if there is a strategy, for example, on integrated tourism in a functional area that is within a transnational program, so of course you should use that. There's no reason to reinvent the wheel here. But the important thing is that, as you also said, Bernard, that it's a strategy that is not, the product of a consultant, and which is not, which has not been developed in a kind of inclusive way. So it has to be a strategy for where there is someone who stands behind it, obviously. But if we have such strategies, why not use them?
Okay, and thanks. And here comes the final one for today. Despite all your pleas, Natalie, there is still the top ranking question that some people see like if we go for PO5, managing authority would not be selecting the projects anymore, but still be responsible. So there's still anxiety or fear that someone might overrule MA.
Well, the MA doesn't select project right now, unless I'm really mistaken, but maybe some MAs would like to, but it's the monitoring committee which is responsible for selecting projects, and the MA has, of course, the right to has the right to issue some warnings if they have doubts about solvency or legality or things like that. But in the end, it's not them. It's not the MA choosing, selecting the projects. But indeed, what would happen under PO5 is that for the local integrated strategy that you have under PO5, you would let the owners of that strategy, owners of that territory, the key players there, decide which actions are needed and which projects should be developed, and the MA would still sign the contract and perform, well, not the audit checks are performed by the audit authority, but perform all the management verifications that are needed. Indeed, the role of the MA would not change much, and this is where I clearly developed the notion of trust in my presentation. So yes, indeed, but it's not that different from the monitoring committee deciding. I have witnessed many conflicts between MA and monitoring committee as well on the selection of projects. So the whole point of PO5 is to bring the money closer to the territory and the people living on that territory. That's really the philosophy of PO5. Whilst the MA, of course, must remain the guarantor of legality and of the expenditure. That's true. And by the way, there were questions on co-financing. We are not going to answer those questions. You know, the financing, co-financing is entirely devolved to the program. You decide. Management verification, it's not different in the future. You do it as you always do. It goes back to the member state's responsibility under the current text of the regulation. So nothing is different in that sense.
Well, I'd just like to add and a bit linking to what I said 5 minutes ago about the experience from these leader, let's say, the leader activities in the rural development programs. Because I mean, there you have the same thing. You have these local action groups that select these projects, and then you have the managing authority that obviously is responsible for the whole program and that does the contracting. And it's actually the same thing for the EMFF, the European Maritime and Fisheries Fund, where we also have the same principles, the same thing. And that fund is really quite similar to what we have here now in our case. But so once again, I mean, but it's still, I mean, it still works. You have, yes, the selection of the projects is then not done by the managing authority, but the managing authority contracts the projects, and at that time they can also check the legality. They can see so that everything is in order. And I know there have been cases where they have found out that some of these projects that were selected by the local action groups were perhaps not the right one. Then you will have a discussion. It's not always easy, but like this, still the managing authority can secure that what is being funded is, you know, what is correct, it's legally correct, it follows the rules. This is possible. I mean, experience shows that one can do this. Go home and speak to your EMFF managing authorities, and they can tell you about this. So that's what I would like to send with you as my message.
So it's now, let's say, my duty to close this meeting. I would really like to thank Natalie, and I would really like to thank Johan, and maybe a couple of remarks. We will take care of the questions you've raised. They will not be lost. We will sort it out and most probably come up with kind of a question answer to the most popular questions. It seems there is still a way to go on that topic. Then there is a couple of interesting videos which you could watch. For example, on territorial employment plans from the Slovak-Hungary program, on territorial plans from Alcotra, which is France-Italy, on CLLD within Interreg from the Italy-Austria program. So there are videos you can watch where you hear the practitioners. There's also a video on the ITI in the Slovenia-Italy program. And what we have established, and Philip, maybe you can show it, is we have established an email address where you can raise the questions, which we will then, let's say, try to channel and answer. And here you can see the email address. Please hand in your questions, questions.territoriality@interacteu.net. With that, I would like to close the session, and thanks to everyone for taking part in that. Goodbye. Thanks a lot.